You're not going to kill a 5-foot tall pigweed with a light. So it's just not going to happen.
That would be a space age laser or something.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah. If you could, you're probably killing your crop too. It's a big laser.
One of our board members is a chiropractor, and he always makes fun of medical doctors, just saying that the only thing they have in their quiver is a pill box. Okay, we're here today with Jared Brown of Greenfield Robotics. Jared, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
I'm excited to hear about what you're talking about today with the robots because of some of my connection of getting into the aerial application business. I actually started with the investing into some drones, and this was back, probably almost 10 years ago or so. And this idea of robots and drones and things like that 10 years ago seemed very far out there, but we've come a long way in 10 years, and this is all much more realistic, and these tools are getting implemented in the farming industry now. Tell us a little bit about Greenfield Robotics and what these machines can do.
The Greenfield exists for the purpose of eliminating chemicals in farming, and so that's really why it was founded. Our founder experienced some disease through the family with his father associated with farm chemicals, and really sought out to figure out a way to farm without those chemicals, and figured out it was pretty hard. The one thing they can't resist are blades. They become resistant to chemicals, and the chemistry has to change frequently, and then of course that ends up in our food and in our fibers and all of that. And so started out with a blade on a robot, and it not an easy thing. You've got a vehicle moving at 1.2 to 1.5 meters per second in a field with spinning blades, and on a 30-inch row crop, and it gets a little tricky not to cut crop down. And but they figured it out, and it's going really well. And the goal is to eliminate the need for chemicals in the future. And of course, we can't do that entirely on day one, but the farmers that are using it are definitely reducing chemicals greatly. And then of course the organic and regenerative guys are not using chemicals at all. But I would say half of our customers are conventional, and they're eliminating their post-plant application of herbicides, and that's a big benefit. So
coming from someone that's in the aerial application business, we spray, of course, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and certain types of crop nutrients. You're really focused on weeds, of course. So how do you view the difference between what you're doing and the herbicides, and how effective the treatments are you do by cutting the weeds as opposed to putting chemicals on them?
Well, I mean, the treatment's very effective because it's cutting the weed. Now that weed does have a chance to come back, and in that case, you just run the robot again. Now it is cutting the weeds between rows. So today we do not have a solution for in-row weeds, but we are working on that, and we'll be making some announcements soon for next season. But processes that we can do to eliminate in-row. But it's very effective for between rows because it's a blade. It's cutting it right above the ground, and of course it can be adjusted on height, but the blades are cutting the weeds right at the near ground level, and the weed is never going to develop a resistance to that. We know that.
Right now, you're cutting about once per season.
So it's going to depend on geography. This last season, about 20% of the farms ran more than once, or ran twice. Sorry, it was either once or twice, never more than twice. But we're always in a drought here. I think in some geographies it might have to run twice. We plan, to run twice, and it could be more than that even. But I don't anticipate it needing to be more than 2 passes in most geographies.
So understandably, because you're not using chemicals, this is much more of considered to be a much more natural treatment. You've gotten some good following from different companies about that.
Yeah. I mean, any food company or fiber company that has an interest in reducing chemicals in their supply chain have responded really well. And we're working with one of our earlier investors was Chipotle. And then we work with Canaday Pet Food to help supply, low chemical or no chemical ingredients for them. And when we're in conversations with other food and fiber companies, but really good response. I mean, you never run across people that want or love chemicals. It's out of necessity, and we're trying to create have a tool that will replace that necessity. But we're realists. We understand that we have to grow the food, and so we can't make this turn in one season or 2 seasons or 5 seasons. It's a very slow process of transitioning to regenerative ag and reducing the chemical use, and getting that soil health back to where it can naturally resist some of these pests and choke out the weeds. So
So with any robot, of course, there's the hardware and then there's the software the brains of it to run it. Tell us about the hardware side. This is something you make in the United States, and
yeah, so
how do you put it together?
yeah, I mean, we have the parts that manufactured. I don't know the exact percentage, but probably above 90% is all US made. And we have the parts sent to us in Cheney, and we assemble there in our shed. Now that's going to change for next year as we expand operations and manufacturing. But they're these little machines. They're 24 inches wide. They're 3 feet tall, 4 feet long. They go down a 30-inch row. Kind of look like a little minion. They're yellow. That's what most people always say. It looks like a little minion. But they're a very hefty piece of equipment. Most people don't look at them and go, "Oh, that's a robot." I mean, it looks like a piece of ag equipment. They're small machines that run up and down fully autonomously, and they turn on a dime. And it was a very challenging feat just to get the thing to turn, come out of a 30-inch row and turn right down the next one without cutting crop. Very difficult problem to solve, and we had really good mechanical and software engineers that tackled that problem to figure it out.
What's a typical weight on these things?
They're around 400 pounds, and we also have a foliar sprayer now. So if you've got that on there and it's full of nutrients, then it's probably pushing 600.
And then from on the software side, is it set up that you can constantly update, or is it a pretty hardwired type of a system?
We can update. We on the software side, we developed internally, we developed the fleet management side of the software. And so our process is that shortly after planting, for usually 14 to 21 days, when that crop is 4 to 6 inches tall, we survey the field with a drone. And we're not identifying weeds, we're identifying things we don't want to hit. So like the crop, so we look at where the center of the crop row is. We identify any, coyote holes or pivot tracks, things like that. And then we put that we do that with our machine vision software. And then we annotate that map for the robot. And the fleet management software was also built internally by our co-founder. And, that's kind of where all the magic happens. You enter all that data into that management system, and then the farmer drops the bots off at the field in the home location. And then we have guys that monitor the robots, and they basically push a button and they go. And they run fully autonomously, and they come back to the home when it's time to have a battery swap and things like that. But
Which you physically take the batteries out, right?
Yeah, we hot swap them right now. Yeah.
Mhm.
Takes 30 seconds, real quick process. They run 5 to 6 hours, 4 to 6, I guess, depending on the terrain and how much weed pressure, but 4 to 6 hours.
Mhm. So you guys started in about 2019. So about the same time I started in the conventional aerial application business. I'm sure you've had to overcome some significant technological challenges. You mentioned one of them is being able to turn between the rows. Any other things that jump out at you?
Well, I wasn't around for all the process, but I know the turning was one big challenge. Battery technology, I think, is another one. That's one area that just hasn't seen a ton of growth. I think it's starting to. But that's a challenge. Like how we have these machines that are operating in pretty volatile environments, and it's really difficult to get the necessary power out of today's battery technology, and finding that sweet spot to where it runs long enough to make it feasible for the farmer. But I think we've done pretty well with what we have. Just a lot of it's in how the machine is designed, to where it doesn't require a lot of power. I mean, we're moving a couple of motors to move the bot, and then a couple of motors to move the cutters. Um, that was a challenge. I think the other was probably the fleet management, how to figure out how not to get them to run into each other in the field or rerun rows that have already been ran. Um, those are some of the other challenges. Size, when we first started, they were very small. They were like I don't even know, I can't remember the exact dimensions, but I think they were more like 12 inches and wide, and that kind of almost looked like an oversized shoebox.
You
And
realize that
quickly
it
figured out
wasn't
that's
covering
way too.
enough space. Yeah.
Yeah, not
That's
covering enough space, and just you can't get enough power out of that smaller unit. So a lot of it was just kind of figuring out what's that sweet spot in size. um of course, in farming, the other challenge is, people like to plant in different row spacing and all of that, so having a one size fits all solution is really tough. And we started out with 30-inch rows because around here in the crops that we're familiar with farming, that's very, very common. um it, the other thing is no one's really focusing on these crops. Most of the ag tech out there, particularly in robotics, are focusing on specialty crops because there's margin available there.
Mhm.
Very few are focusing on broadacre, and we feel pretty passionate about the broadacre. That's not saying we don't work in specialty. We actually do, and we will be this year, and expanding that in the future. But we're very heads down making sure we can make it work in broadacre crops, because that's where we eat and live. So we've been running them on. So the last 3 years have been milo, sunflowers, soybeans, a little bit of corn, cotton. Those are the main acres. But we can run on anything. It's really crop agnostic. It's about the row spacing. Anything
Well,
30 inches or greater.
well, and this broadacre space has really opened up because in the past, this is the way I like to describe it. So one of our board members is a chiropractor, and he always makes fun of medical doctors, just saying that the only thing they have in their quiver is a pill box. Where he tries to address the root of the problem, pun intended, I guess. So here you're addressing the root of the problem, and one of the problems in broadacre now is that there's a lot of these weeds that are becoming resistant to some of the chemicals that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you think of soil, it's very similar to gut health in people. And we take all these medications, or we ingest these different types of poisons, really what they are, that kind of end up in your food and your drink, or in the air. It does the same thing to our stomachs. It kind of it harms that microbiome. And so soil's a lot of the same way. And so you're taking away its ability to defend and protect, really. And so part of what the role that we feel we're playing is, okay, let's figure out a way to eliminate the chemical. That's not going to solve the entire problem. We need to introduce things back into the soil. And not only on the one thing that people seem to forget, and particularly people that are not around farming, is that weed killer doesn't just kill weeds. It also, the plant has to metabolize that as well. And so you're stunting the growth of the crop you're trying to protect as well. There's different numbers. I've heard 10 days, 14 days, up to 20 days of that it takes for that plant to metabolize the chemical. And so you're reducing the quality and maybe even the quantity and the yield,
Or that
when
could
you
be,
do
I
that as
mean,
well.
big challenge, as you said. People that aren't around farming fail to realize what a 5% yield change can mean to the overall
Yeah,
operation of that farm.
yeah.
So we've talked about some of the differences in conventional weed control and what you guys do. How about between different robotics companies? How is Greenfield Robotics different than some of the other robotics companies that are trying to address the ag tech space today?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen several of them, and I see new ones that I didn't know were existed. Matter of fact, I ran across one today online, and I was like, oh, I'd never heard of that one before. Been around for several years, but there's robots that kill weeds with lasers or light source. There's ones that use some type of cultivation or tillage.
Which to be
There's
clear is something you don't do right now. You're only going down to the surface, correct?
right. Yeah, so there's robots that cut, which is what we do, and there's robots that spray chemicals, which we don't. So there's several ways of kind of tackling that. But if you want to think in the world of regenerative, the idea is that we don't disturb the soil, and or we disturb it as little as possible. And so there's not a lot of them that are doing just using a blade. As a matter of fact, I don't know that any that I can think of. There's robotic lawnmowers that go and cut grass, but in the ag space, for cutting weeds, I'm not familiar with any. So there's not really any that are not disturbing the soil and not using a chemical. Now, the laser killers, they're not using a chemical, but they do require quite a bit of energy. And so that can be a challenge. So if you're, one of the really large systems that are running in specialty crops, it's a lot of energy, huge generators. We're trying to operate. I had our mechanical engineer calculate the other day what it costs per operational hour for just from an energy perspective to run one of our bots, and it's 12 cents. So that's hard to beat when you're talking about energy and robotics. And some of the robots are running on a fuel source. Most are electric, some are solar, a lot of different kinds. But when you're adding energy for lasers, you're using there's a lot of power required there. And the
No
other thing
doubt.
is you're limited. You're not going to kill a 5 foot tall pigweed with a light. So
That
it's
would
just
be
not going to happen.
that would be a space age laser or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah,
We could do that.
yeah.
So,
If you could, you're probably killing your crop too. It's a big laser.
right. Well, and something that's, as you move into other markets and stuff, energy infrastructure is more complicated. Energy costs are sometimes elevated in some of these developing markets. So being able to use something that's efficient with energy like you're using is
Yeah,
a much more viable way to address those markets.
sure.
um, so the exciting thing in almost all robotics now, whether you're talking about drones or what you're talking about, is this concept of swarming and the idea of people can kind of start to wrap their mind around a robot going out doing one task rather specific.
Mhm.
But when we're talking about large farms, and most successful farms these days are quite large, you really have to have multiple robots working in unison together. Explain to us how Greenfield Robotics has made some strides in this idea of swarming.
Yeah. So I mean, our whole from the beginning was this idea of having a swarm or a fleet of robots that are just kind of going out and working a field, and so we've had, I think, up to 15, maybe somewhere between 12 and 15 running it at one time in a field. And that's basically that's how many fit on a 14-foot flatbed trailer. So we could probably do more than that, but um, the yeah, the idea is simple. It's just you've got this field, you put these robots out, they work in swarms, they can complete the task faster. I mean, these robots are competing against machines that are 24 plus row machines that go out and can do a job very quickly, but it's also very costly. And so we think,
Constantly and can cause a lot of damage because it's such a
yes,
big.
a lot of compaction. They 2 to 3% damage an average spray rig can cause just in yield. And you mentioned that the average person that's not in agriculture, they don't realize what a 5%
Yield
decrease is.
reduction.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot. Um, I think we calculated, the dollars are fairly significant just in the difference between, we're about we're less than 1% in damage. And I would say the majority of that 1% damage is the end rows, because we have to cut when we make a turn where the main field connects to the end row.
Mhm.
But damage within the field outside of that is very, very low. And so, but yeah, I mean, the idea is that they're doing these tasks, and it's not just one task anymore. So now it might be one task at a time, but now our robots, we can weed during the day and foliar feed at night. And so we're applying these nutrients. And here later in the summer, we're going to roll out a project we've been working on for about a year in partnership with Rock River Labs, where they have a infrared light that scans. We'll put it on each side of the robot and run over the canopy of a crop and scan it to determine what the nutrient deficiency in the plant is. So you don't have to mail in, to labs to get results. And we can take more immediate action, maybe follow it up the next day with that nutrient in one of the foliar feeders. And then eventually it'll happen, all simultaneously. So now we'll be, by next year, and it won't be any large scale, but by next year, we could potentially be doing 3 functions with one robot. And
Which
we'll
would
have
reduce some compaction, obviously reduce the time involved in applying the multiple services you could do at one row. And then obviously just the operating costs would be much less if you could do them all at the
absolutely,
same
yeah. I
time.
mean, next season, we won't be doing it a lot this season. We're doing some, but next season, a farmer will be able to, run that bot for, all of the daylight hours of the day, just cutting weeds. And then they can go and make that last battery change, before bedtime or before supper, load the tank up and set it to go, and it'll be foliar feeding while they're eating dinner or while they're sleeping. And then just it'll stop in the middle of the field in the middle of the night when it's done and sit on idle. But yeah, it'll be working while you're asleep. And yeah, we're excited about that.
It's going to be rare that you can find a farmer that can keep up with these robots as far as the number of hours they can put in. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I've talked to some farmers that are like, man, I really enjoy my time on the tractor. And I think every farmer does to a degree. It's some downtime, it's time to think, but do they want to always be on a tractor, sitting, doing nothing? I mean, not nothing, but they kind of run themselves for the most part, a lot of times on GPS. So an auto steer, you're really not doing a ton. But there's so many other tasks that farmers enjoy and that they need to be able to have time to do. So yeah, it's replacing some of their work, but it's giving them time to do things like, figure out how to plant really healthy, grow really healthy crops. I think every farmer wants to do that and spend their time doing that. And they certainly don't want to spend their time maintaining massive machines, which is what they're having to do now. And most of them, they can't even maintain them now. They have to send them off somewhere, and
At great expense. Yeah.
at a great expense. And these machines we have can be in the field. You can do nearly anything you need to do right there in the field. And if you know how to turn a wrench, you can replace anything on this robot in 15 minutes.
Wow.
So they're very, very easy to work on and maintain. And so there's no more, throwing wrenches across the shop and getting all frustrated about your equipment being down. So.
So you guys have come a long way on a relatively modest budget. You've been in business now, this is your 6th year, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And what are some of the things that you're really looking to do in the near future as far as growth, getting larger groups of these swarms out in the field, things like that? Tell us about the next year of development of Greenfield.
No, that's a great question. So we've kind of maintained the same number of fleet, and then up until this season will be the last season for that. Just making sure we had the design where we wanted it and the software where we wanted it, and I think we're there. And so, our plans are to grow 5x at least minimum. So we're going to go 5x next year, 5x the following year, if not more, and expand geography. So last year, I joined right before the season started last year, right at the beginning of the season. And I've been following Greenfield since the beginning. And, I think I visited the first time when I was in 2019. So I've been watching them closely. And last year we had a few bots in way South Texas. We ran in North Central Oklahoma, Kansas, and a little bit in Nebraska. And this season we expanded. We'll be in 6 states for the spring season. So we'll be in Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, Indiana, Illinois. And then in the fall, we'll be in Florida. So that's 2025. And then for 2026, we're probably already 60% sold. By sold, I mean leased, because we lease the bots. But I think right now, I haven't done a full state count, but I think it's around 16 states. So we went from 3.5. Yeah, last season, I say half because we only ran one field in Texas, but to 6 this season, and then almost tripling that for next season, for 2027.
When you lease these out, you mentioned a trailer load of them. Are you sending some techs with them as part of the package, or how do the mechanics of that? So I'm a grower, I decide to lease some of these things from you.
Yeah.
What shows up on my doorstep?
Yeah. So this year we had the farmers that were leasing came on site and did training on maintenance and all of that, how to operate them. And next year it might be different than that. I'm just saying that's how we did it this year. But then we do a little field planning. Farmer lets us know when they're going to plant, or when they did plant, and then we show up right around that 14 to 21 day after planting mark with the drone, robots, the RTK, and we set everything up, drop the robots off. They're going to get additional parts. So anything that's normal, considered normal wear and tear, like blades, tires, things like that, they'll get spares of right there on the spot. So they'll have them on hand. Any of the major things that we don't really see, like last year we did. I don't recall that we had any actual motors go out. So they're probably not going to get motors on hand, but could, I don't know. And that's really it. I mean, they're going to get the bots. They're going to get their replacement parts and a manual. I mean, there's a manual and recorded videos on how to do everything. And of course we assist them. We can do video calls. We can show up and help. We plan on being physically around as much as possible. But we're not asking farmers to take on large percentages of their farms with these bots either. If you're 1,000-acre farmer, we don't want to go and do 500 acres of your farm the first year. We want it to be a slow and steady transition. And so most of our farmers are getting somewhere between 2 and 5 robots. We have several that are getting 1. They want to try it in a 40-acre field or something. I think the most that I have one farm getting is 10, and it's a very large farm. So we kind of play it by ear, but bite off a little bit, figure it out, learn, and then expand from there. And that's kind of how we're doing business.
Tell us a little bit about how some of the farmers are actually responding to your technology. As you go out there and pitch this to them, what is that conversation like? How do they respond when you say we're going to drop off a fleet of robots?
Yeah. So the response is usually pretty positive. Every farmer wants to be able to get away from having to use chemicals, but it has to make sense. You can't go out and hand weed all the acres. And there's a lot of very, very labor intensive to do that. And so, that's a positive right off the bat. If we're able to say, hey, you don't have to use these post-application herbicides anymore. That's a positive. Now, there is skepticism, yes. But for the most part, they understand. And especially when they see them run. Um, Even one of the large farmers for Chipotle came out, and he uh, he was impressed. The thing that impressed him most is that they looked like ag equipment. They were dirty and scraped up and beat up like they'd been working in a field. And that was kind of a first for him because he sees all these other ag robots that are all shiny at the shows. We don't really take ours to shows because they're in the field. If they're in a show, they're not working. they're not getting, they're not making money. So, um, but the response has been pretty good, especially if they see them. It's not a difficult thing to picture blades cutting weeds working. So it's usually your first fear is, oh, what's going to happen is going to cut all my crop down. You know, um, we have some protections against that. So, and it hasn't really happened in the last few years. It happened a lot when we first started, but it was usually on Clint, our founder's farm. So, his crop was the one getting destroyed as we were figuring out how to build robots. So,
Someone
um,
had to be the guinea pig.
yeah, yeah. And then it started to, okay, some close friends that are farmers, we'll do a few acres there, and then it got to be where, hey, if we do more than X percentage of damage, then we're writing checks and we're covering it. And now it's like this last season, no checks were written because we didn't mow down crops. So they're getting really good at what they do now, and just better and better. And the advancements year over year are just astronomical. I mean, just the difference between last year and this year is huge. Um, and that's why we decided that now's the time to let a farmer take them for the season. Because prior to this season, they operated as a service. MKC, one of our investors and partners that operated bots for us, they show up with them and they did it as a service on a per acre charge. Um, it went so well last year. We thought, you know what? I think it's time. I think farmers can do this now, and it's not going to be a hassle for them. It's going to free up their day a little bit and give them time to do some other work they need to get done, and they can drop these bots off, come back in 4 to 6 hours and do a battery swap, and then leave for another 4 or 6 hours.
So now that you're out there in the field, getting some acreage, getting some adaptation from the grower community, so on and so forth, I understand you're trying to develop some possible new things you can do. So you're cutting weeds now, you're doing a little bit of spraying. What else do you have in mind?
Well, I mean, these things have cameras on them, and I'm not going to get into all the details, but we're obviously going to take full advantage of being in the field and providing as much feedback to farmers as we possibly can on their crop production and how things are going. And so we're going to definitely continue to leverage AI more and add services around that, anything that will benefit the farmer. I mean, the last thing we want to do is just add a bunch of widgets and tech that doesn't move a needle for a farmer. We're farmer first. It's got to be a benefit to them. It's got to be something they need and want and desire. And but we'll be adding that. I mentioned the foliar testing. We'll probably most likely get into doing things with soil as well, applying nutrients. Next year we have a bot that will expand a little bit. Right now it's kind of top secret and hasn't really been out in the public, but it'll plant cover crop and mulch and seed, and basically that's our end-to-end solution that's going to completely eliminate the need for herbicides. And it won't be on a massive number of acres, but it'll make its appearance next year.
When you're ready to launch that, we're happy to talk about it with you again.
Yeah. Well, it'll be at our field days, at some of them, not all of them, maybe, but this year so you'll have an opportunity to start seeing it. Now, when it comes out in production and commercialization, it's not going to look like it does right now. Right now, it's a prototype. I think it's a nice looking machine, but it's not what's going to be out, publicly available next year. But it's going to do some really cool things, and we're excited about it. We're still working through some bugs, and I think I'm pretty confident. I mean, Clint is really good at product development side and really working closely with the engineers and, taking what is a vision and then, getting it to work, between the engineers and the software developers and all of that. So I'm confident it'll work. But it'll be a little bit before we're doing lots and lots of acres because we have to, take it. Yeah, there's a lot of different types of seeds and things that we have to, figure out and make sure it plants and be confident in because, we're messing with farmers' livelihoods. So we make sure it works. So
No doubt. So, you talked about some of the expansion markets around the United States here, and you have a unique perspective. Is this your 10th or your 12th startup you've been involved with?
yeah, I've been with 12, I think it is, unless I
12,
missed
so
one in there.
so as you look at global expansion, obviously there's a lot of markets in Central and South America, Africa, Eastern Europe, things like that. Where do you see some of the opportunities and challenges of expanding to those areas?
The great thing about our product is we just need Starlink. And we don't even have to have Starlink. We can use 4G or anything, but Starlink's worked really well. And so adapting it to other geographies is relatively easy. Our challenge is more about the row spacing. But we can, once we get the 30-inch stuff really nailed, we'll start working on other form factors and sizes, and we'll have to if we want to get into specialty and all of that. But we've been approached every continent. I won't say every country, but every continent and a lot of countries. A lot of interest out of India, a lot of interest. There's been a fair amount of interest, I shouldn't say a lot, but out of Africa and Australia, Europe, a little, but I would say near term, if I had to take a guess, now all of this is all based on opportunity and that can change overnight. But if it was today and I was going to say, hey, this is where we're going next, it would be probably South America. Just based on the amount of interest that we've had from there so far. We get a lot of interest in Mexico as well, Canada. But in today's world, I think in any industry, but especially in agriculture, a startup has to think globally, because it's a global business now. Now, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I don't think it was quite the same. The markets in Brazil didn't have such a direct impact or an immediate impact as they do today. And that's basically because of the flow of information. You get it faster. And so it can disrupt a market quicker. But because of that, because the markets are so intertwined and there's so many large global ag companies, you have to start your ag startup with the intention of being a global company. And it doesn't mean you have to be one immediately, but you have to be willing to go there. And we're certainly willing and looking forward to it. But we want to make sure we've got, before we want to make sure it's all exactly where we want it here before we start going overseas with it.
It'd be a lot harder to fix things if you're 5,000 miles away.
Well, and we've been running on a very, we're a boots on the ground organization and very frugal. I've been around startups enough. I think I could confidently say that if this was any other company in Silicon Valley doing what we did, they would have spent 150 million pretty easily doing what we did on 13 million or less.
That's real impressive.
Yeah.
So Jared Brown, Greenfield Robotics, thanks for talking with us today. And we look forward to seeing you out there on the farms.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate the time.